This video is part B of the exploration of archaeological excavations at Jericho, also known as Tel es Sultan. We left off with a start of the overview of history of habitation, introducing pre-pottery Neolithic A and leading to pre-pottery Neolithic B. Notice the last few bullets that point out the sort of tools we would expect from a Neolithic, that is a stone-dependent culture: flint, bone, adzes, pestles, hammerstones. And here we have some examples of them. Both PPN A and B are shown here. The earlier ones are bordered in green, pre-pottery Neolithic A, bordered in blue, the later pre-pottery Neolithic B. Those in the upper left green zone are bone. And then lower green, flint. What I particularly call your attention to, notice in the lower green, the lower rightmost tool, notice how far apart the denticulation, that is the serration marks, are placed. Contrast that in the blue bordered picture with the largest implement. The left edge of it has very close denticulation. You'll see that in the arrowhead in the upper left of the blue as well. So here we see a more advanced stage of flint denticulation, that is forming the serration in order to have a better cutting edge. I should acknowledge that within the blue picture, the lower left corner has an item that's not flint, it is bone. So it looks like there's a pierced piece that could be used perhaps as an awl. One of the most remarkable structures that was uncovered in PPN-A is known as the large round tower. And notice the dimensions here given in feet. Nearly 28 feet is the diameter at the base, and preserved height, indicating it should have originally stretched even higher, but still extant now in excess of 26 feet tall. Not only so, but within the middle of it, there is a access through a stairway. We're told that this was discovered in the West Trench, so that would be Trench 1 of Kenyon, where it intersects the wall. Now the wall proper would be the innermost of the three that earlier I referred to all of them as walls. Some are walls, some are glosses, but the early bronze inner wall, that would be the innermost of the kind of concentric Cs, and consequently we can locate this at the red circle, and that'll be more clear in some of the successive pictures. Here are two different photographs of the same round tower. Give you a moment to just study this. Notice in the center of the top there is a square aperture. That would be where the inner staircase would come up to the surface. Keep in mind this is not the original surface. Originally it extended some meters higher. If you study the right-hand picture and look at the lower right corner, it's possible this is where the stairway began. I found helpful this conjectured sketch from the ESV Study Bible. For one thing, it clearly locates where they understand the round tower to be, and that fits with the description of Kenyon. So you can imagine the east to west Trench 1 of Kenyon and the round tower being located just inside the wall. Also helpful in this sketch, you can identify some of the zones where other archaeologists conducted their excavations. So in the upper right, Sellen and Watzinger's residential quarter excavation. In the lower right, Garstang's residential quarter. You can also see the spring. Notice in this sketch, the spring is inside one of the city walls. From the photos, we don't have evidence of the city wall on the right side, on the east side. As mentioned earlier, the municipal road that cuts through has destroyed this, and probably some erosion as well. So the east side wall presented here is conjectural. Here's yet another photo, aerial shot of the site. Please note that this time we are facing south. So the trench that you see in the lower, the center zone, that would be the north trench. And then in the middle would be the west trench. The southernmost trench is difficult to distinguish, but it would be some of the darker brown zones towards the top of the photo. Circled then is where the round tower would be located. Yet another photo, this time facing east. East is towards the top. Once again, the circle identifies the location where the round tower is to be found. The purpose of the yellow star is to orient ourselves for the photo that comes next. So imagine yourself standing on the mound at the point of the star, facing downward, that is, looking down along the trench. That'll be the orientation for the next shot, and you will see what appears only very shaded deep within the red circle. You will see more clearly that tower. So now we're standing at the star, sighting down the trench, actually looking west, looking to the Judean hills. And you see then, once again, the round tower with the access stairway marked by the dark rectangle. This then is Kenyon's Trench 1, the east-west trench. Here's an artist's reconstruction of the access stairway. Quite a remarkable piece of architecture for such an early stage of human habitation. Looking down that stairway, that inner stairway. So once again, that's what's meant by the round tower, pre-pottery Neolithic A. As we move to pre-pottery Neolithic B, archaeologists tell us that the culture of it, some signals marked it apart from PPN A rather distinctly. One of these was a shift from the roundish houses, which belong to PPN A, and you see those depicted in the pictures below. In contrast to that, PPN B will have rectangular houses, and they'll be grouped around courtyards. And now rectangular structures. Archaeologists found that there were floors that had been surfaced with a highly burnished lime mortar. The fact that the houses on this level give evidence of being repeatedly rebuilt suggests that this level persisted for quite some time. I would also call your attention to the oblong foundation that's to the lower left. Notice that this raised area, this foundation, consists of some oval or oblong bricks, and some of them seem to have dark spots within them. That will become more evident as a herringbone pattern, handmade brick. You can see that more clearly here. This is characteristic of PPNB. Also from this era of the culture, we hear them referring to trough-shaped cairns. These are grinding stones, and that describes the largest of the stone that you see. Atop it is a spherical, like a flattened spherical stone. That would be the grinding stone. Imagine putting the grain into the hollowed out trough area and then scrubbing it back and forth with the smaller stone. Trough-shaped, running out to one edge, and that's where your flour for the day's bread would emerge. They do not find this type of a grindstone in the older lower level PPN-A. Also characteristic of this level, white limestone bowls, not pottery, but stone, limestone, and then some stone tools. An artistic and signally cultural indication of this layer has to do with 10 human skulls that they found, and fashioned in the face zone of the skull were clay faces. Shells were used in the eyes. Sometimes the eye portion of a reconstructed face would be achieved with the shell, the cowrie shell that you see on the right. I was not able to determine for certain whether or not these plastered faces of Jericho used the cowrie shells, but it's not hard to imagine that they may have been. Elsewhere in ancient culture, cowrie shells were used to represent the eyes. Kenyon speculates this may have been associated with a religion, a spirituality of honoring or worshiping ancestors. Please notice that's speculation. It seems somewhat reasonable. Why else would you invest so much effort? But that indicates the kind of inference which archaeologists engage in when they see an artifact without a written description of what it meant to the inhabitants at that time. Slightly different, but still representing faces, were these thin, stylized human heads. We're purposely showing a side view so that you see it doesn't have a skeleton, doesn't have the cranium there. It's rather a more stylized face with shells still for the eye. The coarse field stones represent the town wall for PPN-B. Field stones refer to undressed, unshaped stones that are simply found in the field, and that contrasts building materials made of clay. Or ashlars. Ashlars refer to large stones that have been trimmed to fit. Now, following PPN-B, and before we get to the early Bronze Age, there's a noticeable gap. Kenyon writes, like PPN-A, its successor, PPN-B, came to an abrupt end. The terrace walls had collapsed in whole or in part, and the fill and floors behind them had been washed out, often to a depth of several layers. Once an earthquake or violent rains had made breaches in the terrace walls, the washout process could have proceeded rapidly. The gap is indicated by the usual erosion stage and by a complete break in the artifacts, particularly the pottery. When we come to the Bronze Age, we notice that the town walls were of handmade bricks. Again, Kenyon writing. At Jericho, the town walls are built of unbaked mud bricks, for this is the natural building material in this neighborhood used even today. The bricks are, in fact, very like those used today and are quite different from those used in the successive Neolithic periods. So there she's distinguishing Neolithic from early Bronze. The latter, Neolithic, were handmade in shapes that vary from the different periods. You want to recall here the herringbone thumbprints. From the early Bronze Age onwards, they are rectangular slabs made in molds, usually about 2 inches thick and 14 inches by 10 inches overall. The bricks are set in mud mortar with fairly thin joints. The brickwork rests on a foundation of 1 or more courses of stone. In earlier stages, the wall is about 3 feet 6 inches thick. This picture helps us observe the contrast between stone foundation courses and then this new type of brick, which is molded rather than hand-shaped. So in blue, stone foundation courses, and then in yellow, notice the regular layering course upon course of a molded brick. I found it interesting to learn what's required to keep a wall of this sort operational. Kenyon writes, such a wall can make a solid and impressive barrier. It does, however, need constant attention to keep it in repair. The top must be kept solid to prevent water percolating in. The erosion of the face must be prevented by plastering, and no denudation allowed to undercut the foundations. Earthquakes present another threat to walls in this region. Kenyon writes, "In addition to the dangers of deterioration, there was at Jericho a special danger from the forces of nature. The whole of the Jordan Valley is an area of seismic disturbance, and major earthquakes happen on average 4 times a century. The excavations have revealed clear evidence of collapses from an earthquake, with the face of the wall fallen straight forward onto the contemporary ground level. A rather curious feature in the structure of the walls is possibly intended as an anti-earthquake device. At intervals in the course of the wall, apparently in almost all phases, were cavities about 3 feet wide, therefore not large enough to have been towers, running almost the whole thickness of the wall. The effect certainly was to localize the collapse, for in such places a section would be found to have collapsed to its foundations, while an immediately adjacent section beyond a cavity would be standing 10 feet or so high." And that from Kenyon. Nigro affirms the early Bronze II city wall collapsed in an earthquake.